The white satin train of Natalie Thompson's wedding dress spread across the cold marble floor of St. Mary's Cathedral like spilled milk, a perfect metaphor for how her entire life had just been poured out and wasted. She sat in the front pew, still wearing her veil, still clutching the bouquet of white roses that now felt like a cruel joke in her trembling hands. The church that had been filled with 200 guests just an hour ago now echoed with nothing but her quiet sobs and the distant sound of the janitor sweeping confetti from the steps outside. Her groom, Michael, had literally run away. Not metaphorically, not dramatically, he had actually sprinted down the aisle in his black tuxedo when his ex-girlfriend Rachel burst through the church doors screaming that she was pregnant with his child. The congregation had gasped collectively as Michael's face went white, then red, then he grabbed Rachel's hand and they both fled through the side exit like fugitives. Natalie had stood there at the altar, frozen in disbelief, watching her future disappear through stained glass windows that suddenly seemed to mock her with their colorful beauty. The pastor had cleared his throat awkwardly and dismissed everyone, mumbling something about private family matters. One by one the guests had filed out, some stopping to offer hollow condolences, others simply avoiding eye contact entirely. Her bridesmaids had tried to console her, but what could they possibly say? Her maid of honor, Jessica, had offered to help her out of the dress, but Natalie had shaken her head and asked to be left alone. Now she sat in the empty church, her carefully applied makeup streaked down her cheeks, her perfectly styled hair falling loose from its elegant updo. The reception hall across town was probably still set up with the flowers she'd spent months selecting, the cake she'd tasted a dozen versions of, the dinner menu she'd agonized over. $300 per person, all paid for, all waiting for guests who would never come. Her phone buzzed constantly in her small beaded purse. Text messages from friends, family members, co-workers who had heard the news. She couldn't bear to read them. What was there to say? That she'd been humiliated in front of everyone she knew? That the man she'd planned to spend her life with had been cheating on her with his ex? That she was 28 years old and starting over with nothing but a wedding dress she'd never wear again? The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting rainbow patterns across the empty pews. Natalie had dreamed of this moment since she was a little girl walking down the aisle in a beautiful dress, promising forever to someone who loved her completely. Instead, she felt like the biggest fool in the world. How had she missed the signs? How had she not known that Michael was still in love with Rachel? How had she let herself believe in a fairy tale that was never real? Her savings account was empty. She'd spent everything on this wedding. Her apartment lease was up next month because she and Michael were supposed to move into his house. Her job at the elementary school barely paid enough to cover basic expenses, let alone starting over completely. She had no plan, no backup, no idea how to pick up the pieces of her shattered life. The church door creaked open, and Natalie looked up expecting to see the janitor coming to ask her to leave. Instead, she saw a small figure in a yellow dress walking slowly down the aisle. A little girl, maybe 6 years old, with curly black hair and the biggest brown eyes Natalie had ever seen. The child approached carefully, as if she understood that something very sad had happened here. "Are you okay, pretty lady?" the little girl asked softly, stopping a few feet away from Natalie's pew. Natalie wiped her eyes and tried to compose herself. She didn't want to frighten this innocent child with her tears. "I'm fine, sweetie. Are you here with your family?" The little girl shook her head. "My daddy is looking for me, but I saw you crying and I wanted to help." She stepped closer, her small face full of concern. "Why are you so sad in your pretty white dress?" Natalie's heart broke all over again. How could she explain adult disappointment and betrayal to someone so young? "Sometimes grown-ups make promises they don't keep," she said simply. The little girl nodded sagely, as if she understood more than her years should allow. "My mommy made a promise to always be with me, but she had to go to heaven when I was born. Daddy says sometimes promises get broken, but not because people want to break them." Natalie stared at this wise little soul, amazed by her insight. "I'm sorry about your mommy, honey." "It's okay. Daddy takes good care of me, but sometimes I wish I had a mommy too." The little girl climbed up onto the pew beside Natalie, smoothing her yellow dress carefully. "You look like you need a hug." Before Natalie could respond, the child wrapped her small arms around her waist. The simple gesture of comfort from this stranger's daughter made Natalie cry even harder, but these tears felt different somehow. Less bitter, more healing. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Natalie asked, gently stroking the girl's curly hair. "Sophie Mitchell." "What's yours?" "Natalie Thompson." Sophie pulled back to look at her seriously. "Miss Natalie, I think you need a home and I need a mommy. Maybe we can help each other." The innocent words hit Natalie like lightning. This child, who didn't even know her, was offering exactly what she needed most: a purpose, a reason to keep going, a way to matter to someone. Before she could respond, she heard rapid footsteps echoing through the church and a man's voice calling urgently. Sophie. Sophie, where are you? Sophie. The voice grew closer, filled with panic and relief. There you are. I've been searching everywhere for you. Natalie looked up to see a tall man in a navy blue suit hurrying toward them down the center aisle. He was handsome in an understated way, with dark brown hair slightly messed from running his hands through it, and worried green eyes that immediately softened when he saw his daughter safe. But as he got closer and took in the scene, his 6-year-old daughter comforting a crying woman in a wedding dress, confusion replaced the relief on his face. Sophie, you can't just wander off like that, he said gently but firmly as he reached their pew. I was worried sick. His eyes met Natalie's and she saw kindness there, not judgment. I'm so sorry if she's bothering you. We were visiting the church and she slipped away from me. She's not bothering me at all, Natalie managed, her voice hoarse from crying. She's been wonderful company. Sophie looked up at her father with the serious expression that seemed to be her trademark. Daddy, this is Miss Natalie. She's very sad because someone broke a promise to her. I told her maybe we could help each other because she needs a home and I need a mommy. James Mitchell's face went through several emotions at once: embarrassment at his daughter's boldness, concern for this obviously distressed woman, and something else Natalie couldn't quite identify. He sat down carefully in the pew across from them, his eyes never leaving Natalie's face. I apologize for my daughter's directness, he said softly. She has a habit of trying to fix everyone's problems. He paused, studying Natalie's tear-stained face and elaborate wedding dress. I don't want to pry, but are you all right? Do you need us to call someone for you? Natalie almost laughed at the absurdity of it all. Here she was, having the worst day of her life, and a complete stranger and his daughter were showing her more kindness than her own groom had. I don't really have anyone to call, she admitted. My wedding was supposed to be today, but the groom changed his mind and ran off with his ex-girlfriend. The words sounded even more pathetic spoken out loud to strangers, but James didn't look at her with pity. Instead, his expression hardened with anger on her behalf. What kind of man leaves his bride at the altar? He asked, his voice tight with controlled fury. I'm sorry. That's none of my business. That's incredibly cruel. Sophie had been listening to this exchange with rapt attention, her little face growing more indignant by the minute. That was very mean of him, Miss Natalie. You're too pretty and nice to be treated bad like that. Despite everything, Natalie found herself smiling at the child's fierce loyalty to someone she'd just met. Thank you, Sophie. That's very sweet of you to say. She's right, James said quietly. Anyone who would do something like that doesn't deserve you. The simple statement, delivered without drama or false comfort, somehow meant more to Natalie than all the elaborate condolences she'd received earlier. This man didn't know her, had no reason to care about her problems, yet he was treating her with genuine respect and concern. Daddy, Sophie said suddenly, tugging on her father's sleeve. Miss Natalie doesn't have anywhere to go, does she? Her mean almost husband left her and she's all alone. We should help her. Sophie. James started, but his daughter interrupted him. Remember what you always tell me? That when we see someone who needs help, we help them if we can. Miss Natalie needs help. James looked at his daughter, then at Natalie, clearly torn between wanting to respect boundaries and genuinely wanting to help. Sophie's right that we should help if we can, but Miss Natalie might prefer to handle this privately with her own family and friends. Natalie shook her head. Most of my friends were at the wedding. I can't face them right now. And my family lives across the country. She took a shaky breath. Honestly, I don't know what I'm going to do. I spent all my savings on this wedding, my lease is up next month, and I don't have a plan. The vulnerability in her voice made James lean forward slightly. What do you do for work? I'm an elementary school teacher. 2nd grade. She managed a weak smile. I love working with children. They're honest and pure-hearted like Sophie here. Sophie beamed at the compliment, then looked at her father with excitement. Daddy? Miss Natalie loves children and I love her already. This is perfect. James ran a hand through his hair, clearly wrestling with a decision. Look, I know this is going to sound crazy and please feel free to say no, but would you like to come home with us? Just for tonight so you don't have to be alone. We have a guest room, and tomorrow we can help you figure out your next steps. Natalie stared at him in shock. I couldn't possibly impose like that. You don't even know me. Sometimes the best people are the ones you haven't met yet, Sophie said wisely, making both adults look at her in amazement. James chuckled despite the serious situation. She gets that wisdom from her grandmother. But seriously, the offer stands. No strings attached, no expectations. Just one person helping another through a difficult time. Natalie felt tears welling up again, but these were different tears. For the first time all day, someone was offering her kindness without wanting anything in return. The gesture was so unexpected, so generous, that it restored a tiny bit of her faith in human goodness. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say yes," Sophie urged, reaching over to take Natalie's hand in her small one. "Please? I promise we're very nice. Daddy makes the best pancakes and I have lots of books we can read together." James smiled at his daughter's sales pitch. The pancakes are pretty good and she does have an impressive book collection. Plus, it would mean a lot to Sophie to have some female company. It's usually just the two of us. Natalie looked between father and daughter, seeing nothing but genuine concern and welcome in their faces. After the betrayal and humiliation she'd endured today, their offer felt like a miracle. "If you're sure it's not too much trouble," she said hesitantly. "It's no trouble at all," James assured her. "In fact, you'd be doing us a favor. Sophie doesn't get to meet many new people, and she's clearly taken a strong liking to you." Sophie squeezed Natalie's hand. "This is going to be wonderful. You can stay as long as you want and we can be friends forever." 20 minutes earlier, James Mitchell had been standing in the church lobby, his heart hammering with panic as he realized his daughter had vanished. One moment she had been beside him, admiring the beautiful stained glass windows while he spoke with Pastor Williams about the community outreach program he was designing. The next moment he'd turned around and she was gone. "Sophie?" he'd called softly at first, not wanting to disturb the sacred quiet of the church. When there was no response, his voice grew louder and more urgent. "Sophie." Pastor Williams had immediately joined the search, checking the Sunday school rooms and the small chapel while James combed through the main sanctuary. His mind had raced through all the terrible possibilities. Had someone taken her? Had she wandered outside into traffic? Sophie was a curious child, brave and independent sometimes to a fault, but she was also responsible and rarely disobeyed direct instructions. They'd been visiting the church because James was considering it for his architectural firm's next pro bono project. The building needed structural reinforcements and accessibility updates, and he'd wanted to see the space in person. Sophie had been excited to come along, as she always was when it involved spending time with her daddy. She'd been particularly fascinated by the way the afternoon light streamed through the colored glass, creating patterns on the floor that she'd been trying to catch with her hands. As he'd searched, James's mind had wandered to all the times he'd worried about raising Sophie alone. When his wife Elena had died during childbirth, he'd been thrust into single parenthood with no preparation and no roadmap. The first few months had been a blur of sleepless nights, formula bottles, and desperate phone calls to his mother-in-law for advice. As Sophie grew, he'd worried constantly about whether he was enough for her, whether she was missing out on things that only a mother could provide. He'd never remarried, though not for lack of opportunities. Several women had shown interest over the years and he'd gone on a few dates, but none of them had felt right. Some had seemed more interested in his successful architectural practice than in him personally. Others had been kind but clearly uncomfortable with the reality of dating a single father. A few had been wonderful people who just hadn't clicked with Sophie, and James had learned early on that his daughter's happiness and security had to come first. Sophie had never seemed to mind being raised by just her father. She was a bright, confident child who made friends easily at school and adapted well to new situations. But lately, James had noticed her watching other families more intently, asking more questions about mothers and what they did that was different from fathers. She'd started mentioning her friends' mothers more often, describing the elaborate birthday parties they threw or the special crafts they made together. The panic of losing her in the church had brought all of these concerns rushing back. What if she'd gone looking for something she felt was missing from her life? What if she was starting to rebel against their little family of two? What if he really wasn't enough for her anymore? When he'd finally found her in the main sanctuary, sitting next to a woman in an elaborate wedding dress, his first emotion had been overwhelming relief. She was safe. She was unharmed. She was exactly where she was supposed to be, trying to help someone who needed it, just as he'd taught her. But as he'd approached and seen the scene more clearly, his confident, happy daughter offering comfort to a stranger who was obviously in deep pain, James had felt something shift inside him. Sophie wasn't acting out or rebelling or seeking something he couldn't give her. She was being exactly the person he'd raised her to be, kind, empathetic, and brave enough to reach out to someone in need. And the woman she was comforting. James had been struck immediately by something beyond her obvious distress. Even with her makeup streaked and her hair disheveled, Even sitting in a wedding dress that represented a day gone horribly wrong, there was something about her that drew him in. Maybe it was the way she'd instinctively gentled her voice when speaking to Sophie, or the way she'd managed to smile through her tears when his daughter had offered her a hug. When Sophie had announced her matchmaking intentions so boldly, James had been mortified. His 6-year-old daughter had essentially just proposed that a complete stranger become her mother, right there in the church pew. But looking at this woman Natalie, he hadn't seen annoyance or discomfort. Instead, he'd seen something that looked almost like hope flickering in her eyes. The story she told them had made his blood boil. What kind of coward left his bride at the altar? What kind of man made promises he had no intention of keeping? James had been married for only 2 years before Elena died, but in that time he'd learned that real love meant showing up, especially when it was difficult. Real love meant keeping your word even when it was inconvenient. This woman had been betrayed by someone who was supposed to love her, abandoned at what should have been the happiest moment of her life. The least he could do was offer her basic human kindness and a safe place to spend the night. But even as he'd made the offer, James had wondered if he was being motivated by more than simple charity. There was something about Natalie that called to him, something that made him want to fix what had been broken in her life. And the way Sophie had taken to her so immediately, with such fierce protectiveness and instant affection, it was remarkable. As they prepared to leave the church together, James found himself hoping that this was the beginning of something important, not just a brief encounter with a stranger in distress. Sophie had said that Natalie needed a home and she needed a mother. Looking at them together, James was starting to think that maybe he needed them both more than he'd realized. The ride to James's house was quiet, with Sophie chattering softly to Natalie about her favorite books and her pet goldfish named Bubbles, while James focused on driving and stealing glances at his unexpected passenger in the rearview mirror. Natalie sat in the back seat beside Sophie, still in her wedding dress, looking dazed but grateful. "Miss Natalie," Sophie said suddenly, "are you hungry? Daddy always says people should eat something when they're sad because it helps your brain think better." Natalie realized she hadn't eaten anything since a piece of toast early that morning. Her stomach had been too nervous before the ceremony, and afterward food had been the last thing on her mind. "Actually, I am quite hungry," she admitted. "Perfect." Sophie clapped her hands together. "Daddy, can we stop and get Miss Natalie some food? She needs to eat so she can feel better." James caught Natalie's eye in the mirror. "There's a nice little deli just ahead. Would you like to grab something?" "My treat, of course." "Oh no, I couldn't let you pay for my food too," Natalie protested. "You're already being so generous with the place to stay." "Please," James said firmly. "Let us help. It's the least we can do." When Natalie started to protest again, Sophie reached over and patted her hand. "Miss Natalie, when people want to be nice to you, you should let them. It makes them happy to help, and it makes you happy to be helped. That's what Daddy taught me." Out of the mouths of babes, Natalie thought, managing her first real smile of the day. "You're absolutely right, Sophie. Thank you both. That's very kind." They stopped at Miller's Deli, where James insisted on buying enough food for all 3 of them. While they waited for their sandwiches, Sophie held Natalie's hand and told her about her school and her best friend Kayla and her art teacher who let her use the good colored pencils. "I'm in 1st grade, Sophie explained importantly. "Next year I'll be in 2nd grade. "What grade do you teach, Miss Natalie?" "2nd grade, Natalie answered, feeling some of her natural teacher warmth returning. "So you'll be in my grade level next year." Sophie's eyes went wide with excitement. "Really? Maybe you could be my teacher. That would be the best thing ever." James watched this exchange with growing amazement. In the space of an hour, his reserved daughter had completely opened up to this woman, sharing details about her life that she usually only revealed to people she'd known for months. And Natalie, despite her own trauma, was responding to Sophie with genuine interest and affection. Back in the car with their food, James made a decision. "You know what? I just realized something. You mentioned that your reception was already paid for." Natalie's face fell. "Yes. 300 people, all that food and music, it's all just sitting there going to waste." "No, it's not," James said firmly. "We're going to go to that reception." Both Natalie and Sophie stared at him in surprise. "We can't just let all that food and celebration go to waste," James continued. "Sophie, would you like to go to a fancy party with dancing and cake?" "Yes." Sophie squealed with delight. "But Miss Natalie, won't that make you sad?" Natalie was quiet for a long moment, considering. The thought of facing that reception hall with all its wedding decorations and romantic music felt overwhelming. But then she looked at Sophie's eager face and James's encouraging smile, and something shifted inside her. "You know what?" she said slowly. "Maybe it won't make me sad. Maybe it will make me happy to see those beautiful decorations and eat that expensive cake with two people who actually care about me." "That's the spirit," James said warmly. "Every celebration should have people who appreciate it. And besides, you look beautiful in that dress. It would be a shame not to dance in it at least once." Sophie bounced in her seat. "Can I dance too? I know how to waltz because Grandma Elena taught me." "Your grandma taught you to waltz?" Natalie asked with interest. "She was my daddy's wife's mommy," Sophie explained matter-of-factly. "My mommy went to heaven when I was born, but Grandma Elena still comes to visit us and teaches me special things. She says my mommy would want me to know how to be a lady." Natalie felt her heart squeeze with sympathy for this little girl who had never known her mother but spoke about it with such acceptance and grace. "I bet your mommy is very proud of what a wonderful young lady you're becoming." "I think so too," Sophie said confidently. "And I think she would like you very much, Miss Natalie. You're kind like Daddy says she was." James had to clear his throat to hide his emotion. Sophie rarely talked about her mother so openly, especially not with people she'd just met. But something about Natalie seemed to make her feel safe and comfortable sharing these deep feelings. When they arrived at the reception hall, the staff was confused but accommodating. The manager explained that some guests had called to cancel, but most of the food and arrangements were still in place. "Well then," James said, handing the manager his credit card, "we'd like to enjoy the celebration as planned. Just for the three of us." The manager smiled, clearly touched by the gesture. "Of course, sir. Right this way." The reception hall was even more beautiful than Natalie remembered from the planning meetings. White flowers cascaded from every surface, soft music played from the sound system, and round tables covered in ivory linens surrounded a polished dance floor. Under different circumstances, it would have been magical. But as she walked in with James and Sophie, Natalie realized that maybe it still could be magical, just in a different way than she'd originally planned. "Oh my goodness," Sophie breathed, taking in the elegant decorations. "Miss Natalie, this is the prettiest party I've ever seen. Would you like to see the cake?" Natalie asked, leading them to the elaborate three-tiered creation covered in fondant flowers. "It's so fancy," Sophie marveled. "Can we really eat it?" "We can eat whatever we want," James said, lifting Sophie up so she could see the cake better. "This is our party now." As the staff served them dinner at one of the beautifully decorated tables, Natalie found herself actually enjoying the evening. Sophie's excitement was infectious, and James proved to be wonderful company, funny, thoughtful, and genuinely interested in getting to know her better. "So what made you want to become a teacher?" James asked as they shared the wedding cake for dessert. "I've always loved working with children," Natalie replied. "They're so honest and open and full of possibility. Every day is an adventure when you're seeing the world through their eyes." "That's exactly how I feel about Sophie," James said, smiling at his daughter, who was carefully savoring each bite of cake. "She shows me things I would never notice on my own." "What about you? What made you become an architect?" "I love building things that will last," James said thoughtfully. "I like the idea that long after I'm gone, families will still be making memories in the houses I designed, or communities will still be gathering in the buildings I helped create." Natalie was struck by the depth of his answer. This was a man who thought about legacy, about making a positive impact on the world. So different from Michael, who had always been focused on immediate gratification and personal gain. When the music started playing, James stood up and offered Natalie his hand. "Would you like to dance? It seems a shame to waste all this beautiful music." Natalie hesitated for just a moment, then took his hand. On the dance floor, James was a gentle and confident partner, leading her through simple steps that made her feel graceful despite her emotional exhaustion. "Thank you," she said softly as they swayed to a romantic ballad. "For everything. I don't know how I would have gotten through today without you and Sophie." "You would have been fine," James said with conviction. "You're stronger than you know. But I'm glad we found each other today." Sophie watched them dance with obvious delight, clapping along to the music and occasionally joining them on the dance floor for more energetic songs. As the evening wound down, Natalie realized she felt more hopeful than she had in months, not because of romantic possibility, though she couldn't deny the attraction she felt to James, but because she'd been reminded that there were still good people in the world. People who showed up when they said they would, who kept their promises, who treated others with kindness and respect. As they prepared to leave, Sophie yawned widely and snuggled against Natalie's side. "This was the best party ever," she declared. "Can Miss Natalie stay with us forever?" James and Natalie exchanged a look over her head, both of them wondering the same thing. The next morning, Natalie woke up in the most comfortable bed she'd slept in for months. James's guest room was decorated in soft blues and whites, with large windows that let in the morning sun and a small bookshelf filled with novels and poetry collections. For just a moment she forgot where she was and why she was there. Then reality came rushing back: the wedding, the humiliation, the complete upheaval of her life. But instead of the crushing despair she'd felt yesterday, she found herself thinking about Sophie's gap-toothed smile and James's kind eyes. She found herself remembering the way they danced together at her ruined reception, turning what should have been the worst night of her life into something unexpectedly beautiful. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Natalie?" Sophie's voice called quietly. "Are you awake? Daddy made pancakes." Natalie smiled, wrapping the robe James had lent her around herself. "I'm awake, sweetheart. Give me 5 minutes and I'll be right down." She'd managed to get most of the pins out of her hair the night before, but it still looked like she'd been through a tornado. She did her best to smooth it down and wash the remaining makeup from her face. In the mirror she looked pale and tired, but somehow more like herself than she had in months. Downstairs she found James at the stove flipping pancakes while Sophie sat at the kitchen table, already dressed for the day in jeans and a pink t-shirt with a unicorn on it. "Good morning," James said with a warm smile. "I hope you slept well." "Better than I have in weeks," Natalie admitted. "Thank you so much for letting me stay." "Thank you for staying," Sophie piped up. "I was worried you might disappear like a fairy godmother when the magic wore off." James chuckled. "Sophie's been reading a lot of fairy tales lately. Everything is magic and happily ever after in her world." "Nothing wrong with believing in magic," Natalie said, sitting down beside Sophie. "Some of the best things in life feel like magic when they happen." As they ate James's admittedly excellent pancakes, Sophie chattered about her plans for the day. It was Saturday, so there was no school, but she had ballet class in the afternoon and wanted to show Natalie her dance moves. "What are your plans for today?" James asked Natalie gently. "Do you need us to drive you anywhere or help you with anything?" The question brought Natalie back to reality. She needed to figure out what came next, where she was going to live, how she was going to rebuild her life. The task felt overwhelming but not quite as impossible as it had yesterday. "I should probably go back to my apartment and start packing," she said. "I need to find a new place to live by the end of the month." "That's not very much time," James observed. "Do you have somewhere in mind?" Natalie shook her head. "I'll probably have to find a roommate situation or a studio apartment. Something cheap until I can save up some money again." Sophie had been listening to this conversation with growing concern. "Daddy," she said suddenly, "why doesn't Miss Natalie just stay here? We have lots of room and she could help me with my homework and read me bedtime stories." James nearly choked on his coffee. "Sophie, honey, Miss Natalie has her own life to live. She can't just move in with strangers." "We're not strangers anymore," Sophie protested. "We're friends, and friends help each other." Natalie felt her heart warm at the child's simple logic, but she shook her head. "Sophie, you and your daddy have already done so much for me. I can't impose on your kindness any more than I already have." But Sophie wasn't giving up easily. "Miss Natalie, do you like children?" "Of course I do. I'm a teacher, remember?" "And do you like cooking and cleaning and taking care of people?" "Well, yes, I suppose I do." Sophie turned to her father with triumph. "See, Daddy? Miss Natalie would be perfect. She could be my nanny and help take care of me, and you could pay her so she wouldn't have to worry about money and everyone would be happy." James looked mortified. "Sophie, you can't just hire people to be your nanny without asking them first." But Natalie was staring at Sophie with growing amazement. Out of the mouths of babes, indeed. The little girl had just proposed a solution that could work for everyone involved. Natalie needed a job and a place to live. James needed help caring for his daughter. And Sophie clearly wanted Natalie around. "Actually," Natalie said slowly, "that's not a terrible idea." James looked up at her in surprise. "You can't be serious." "Why not?" Natalie asked, warming to the concept. "I'm already qualified to work with children. I love spending time with Sophie. And you said yourself that it's usually just the two of you. Maybe you could use some help." James was quiet for a long moment, clearly thinking it over. "I don't want you to feel like you have to take this job just because you're in a difficult situation. If you're going to work for us, it should be because you genuinely want to, not because you feel obligated." "I do want to," Natalie said, surprising herself with how true it was. "Yesterday was the worst day of my life, but meeting you and Sophie was the best part of it. I'd love to be part of your family, even if it's just as an employee." You wouldn't be just an employee, Sophie said firmly. You'd be family. Right, Daddy? James looked between his daughter and Natalie, seeing the hope in both their faces. If we're going to do this, we should do it properly. Natalie, would you be interested in a live-in nanny position? Room and board plus a salary. You'd have your own space in the guest house out back, but you'd take care of Sophie when I'm at work and help with household management. Natalie's heart leaped. The guest house. It's small but comfortable, James explained. 1 bedroom, kitchenette, private entrance. It was originally built for my mother-in-law, but she decided she preferred her own apartment in town. Can we show her, Daddy? Sophie asked excitedly. If she'd like to see it, James said, looking at Natalie questioningly. I'd love to see it, Natalie said. The guest house was perfect. Small but bright, with a cozy living area, compact kitchen, and bedroom with windows overlooking James's beautiful garden. It felt like a fairy tale cottage, private but still connected to the main house. What do you think? James asked as they stood in the living room. I think it's wonderful, Natalie said honestly. But are you sure about this? You don't really know me. I could be a terrible nanny. You're not terrible, Sophie said confidently. You're perfect. I can tell. James smiled at his daughter's certainty. Sophie's a pretty good judge of character. And honestly, I could use the help. My work has been getting busier, and I worry about Sophie being alone too much after school. Then it's settled. Sophie clapped her hands together. Miss Natalie is going to live with us and take care of me, and we're going to be the happiest family ever. Natalie felt tears welling up in her eyes again, but these were tears of gratitude and relief. 24 hours ago, her life had been destroyed. Now she had a job, a home, and people who genuinely seemed to care about her. There is one condition, James said seriously. Both Natalie and Sophie looked at him with concern. Sophie, if Miss Natalie is going to be taking care of you, you have to promise to listen to her and follow her rules just like you do mine. And Natalie, if there are ever any problems or if this arrangement isn't working for you, I want you to tell me honestly. Deal? Deal? Natalie said without hesitation. Deal? Sophie echoed. This is going to be so much fun. As they walked back to the main house to discuss details like salary and schedules, Natalie felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Not just hope for survival or getting by, but hope for genuine happiness. Hope for belonging somewhere. Hope for a future that might be even better than the one she'd lost. 3 weeks later, Natalie had settled into a routine that felt more natural than anything she'd experienced in years. She woke up each morning in her cozy guest house, had coffee while watching the sunrise through her kitchen window, then walked across the garden to the main house to help Sophie get ready for school. The little girl was a joy to care for, bright, curious, and surprisingly independent for her age. She could brush her own teeth and pick out her clothes, but she loved having Natalie braid her hair and pack her lunch with little surprise notes tucked inside. Miss Natalie, Sophie said one morning as they walked to school together, do you think my mommy would like you? The question caught Natalie off guard, as Sophie's comments about her mother often did. I hope she would, sweetheart. What makes you think about her? I dream about her sometimes, Sophie said matter-of-factly. Last night I dreamed that she came to visit and you were there too, and she told me she was happy that I had you to take care of me. Natalie's heart clenched with emotion. That sounds like a beautiful dream. It was. She looked just like in the pictures Daddy has, but she was wearing a pretty white dress like yours was. And she wasn't sad about being in heaven because she knew Daddy and I were happy. The simple faith and acceptance in Sophie's voice amazed Natalie. This child had lost her mother but found a way to carry her memory as a source of comfort rather than pain. At school, Natalie was quickly becoming known as Sophie's Natalie among the other parents and children. She'd made friends with several of the mothers who picked up their children at the same time, and they'd invited her to join their book club and weekend playdates. You're so lucky to have such a wonderful nanny, one mother, Patricia, had commented. Sophie obviously adores you, and you can tell she feels so secure and happy. Natalie had been touched by the observation. In her previous job at the public school, she'd often worried that she wasn't making enough of a difference in her students' lives, that the bureaucracy and large class sizes prevented her from really connecting with individual children. But with Sophie, she could see daily evidence of the positive impact she was having. Sophie's grades had improved since Natalie started helping with homework. Her confidence had grown as she had someone to share her daily adventures with. And her natural empathy and kindness seemed to be flourishing under Natalie's patient guidance. In the afternoons, while Sophie did homework or played in the garden, Natalie often helped with household tasks. She found she genuinely enjoyed creating a warm, organized home environment. She learned James's favorite meals and made sure the house was filled with the smells of cooking and the sounds of Sophie's laughter. James's work schedule was demanding but flexible. As the owner of his architectural firm, he could sometimes work from home, and Natalie loved those days when all three of them were together. James would set up his drafting table in the sunroom while Sophie did puzzles or coloring nearby, and Natalie would work on lesson plans or read in the living room. It felt like family in a way that surprised her with its naturalness. One evening, James came home from a particularly long day at the office to find Natalie and Sophie in the kitchen making homemade pizza. Sophie was standing on a step stool, carefully arranging pepperoni on her small pizza while Natalie guided her hands. "Something smells amazing in here," he said, loosening his tie as he watched them work. "Miss Natalie is teaching me how to make pizza from scratch," Sophie announced proudly. "We made the dough and everything. And we made your favorite kind with mushrooms and olives." James felt his heart do something complicated as he watched Natalie smile at his daughter's enthusiasm. Over the past few weeks, he'd been amazed by how seamlessly she'd fit into their lives. Sophie had never been happier or more settled. The house felt warmer and more alive with Natalie in it. But more than that, James found himself looking forward to coming home in a way he hadn't since Elena died. Not just because Sophie was well cared for, but because Natalie would be there too, ready to share the small details of their day and ask about his work with genuine interest. "How was your meeting with the school board?" Natalie asked as they sat down to eat their homemade pizza. James was touched that she remembered. "Good, actually. They approved the accessibility renovations for the elementary school. Construction should start this summer." "That's wonderful. Sophie, your daddy is going to help make sure children who use wheelchairs can get around their school more easily." Sophie looked at her father with pride. "You help people with your buildings, don't you, Daddy?" "I try to," James said. "Buildings should work for everyone who uses them. Just like families should work for everyone in them," Sophie said wisely, making both adults pause. Later that evening, after Sophie was in bed, James found Natalie in the garden reading by the outdoor lights. She changed into jeans and a soft sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders, and she looked so peaceful and content that he almost didn't want to disturb her. "Good book?" he asked, settling into the chair beside hers. "Jane Austen," she said, holding up the worn copy of Pride and Prejudice. "I read it every year. There's something comforting about stories where everything works out in the end." "Do you think everything works out in the end in real life too?" James asked. Natalie considered the question seriously. "I used to think it did. Then I thought it didn't. Now I'm starting to think that maybe it depends on how you define working out. 3 weeks ago I thought my life was ruined. But sitting here now, I'm happier than I've been in years." "I'm glad," James said softly. "We're both happier since you came to live with us. Sophie talks about you constantly, and I can see how much more confident and secure she feels." "She's an amazing child," Natalie said warmly. "You've done such a wonderful job raising her. She's kind and smart and brave, and she has this incredible ability to see the good in people and situations." "She gets that from her mother," James said quietly. "Elena always looked for the silver lining in everything. Even when she was dying, she kept telling me that our daughter would be a source of joy, not sadness. She made me promise to remember that." It was the most James had ever shared about his late wife, and Natalie felt honored by his trust. "She sounds like she was an incredible woman." "She was. Different from you, but incredible in her own way." James paused, then added, "I think she would have liked you very much. And I think she would be grateful that Sophie has you in her life now." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning that neither of them was quite ready to acknowledge. But as they sat together in the garden, surrounded by the peaceful sounds of evening, both of them felt something shifting and growing between them, something that felt like the beginning of love. 1 month into her new life, Natalie woke up on a Saturday morning feeling lighter than she had in years. The sun was streaming through her bedroom windows, birds were singing in James's carefully tended garden, and she could hear Sophie's laughter coming from the main house. For the first time since the wedding disaster, she wasn't thinking about Michael at all when she opened her eyes. She found James and Sophie in the kitchen making what appeared to be the world's most elaborate pancake breakfast. Chocolate chips, blueberries, whipped cream, and maple syrup covered the counter, and both father and daughter had flour in their hair. "Miss Natalie," Sophie called out when she saw her. "We're making celebration pancakes because Daddy finished his big project yesterday." "The community center downtown," James explained, grinning as he flipped a pancake shaped like a butterfly. 6 months of work, and they finally approved the final designs. That's wonderful, Natalie said, genuinely excited for him. Over the past month, she'd listened to James talk through various challenges with the project, and she knew how much it meant to him to create something that would serve families in the community. We wanted to surprise you with breakfast, Sophie said, carefully arranging blueberries on a pancake to look like a smiley face. Because you always make us special meals. As they ate their celebratory breakfast, James watched Natalie interact with his daughter and marveled at the change in both of them. Sophie had always been a happy child, but lately she'd been positively glowing with contentment. She talked constantly about Miss Natalie and the things they did together. Her teachers had commented on how much more focused and confident she seemed in class. And Natalie, when James had first seen her in the church, she'd been broken and lost, barely holding herself together. Now she moved through their home with quiet confidence, bringing warmth and organization to every space she touched. She laughed easily, especially at Sophie's jokes, and had started wearing her hair down more often. The stressed lines around her eyes had softened, and she seemed to smile without effort. But James had also noticed moments when Natalie would get a distant look in her eyes, times when she seemed to be wrestling with something internal. He'd wanted to ask her about it but hadn't been sure how to bring it up without overstepping boundaries. That afternoon, while Sophie was at her friend's birthday party, James found Natalie in the garden pulling weeds from the flower beds. She'd volunteered to help with the yard work, claiming she found gardening relaxing, and James had been happy to accept the help. "You don't have to do that," he said, settling down beside her with his own gardening gloves. "Yard work isn't part of your job description." "I want to," Natalie said, carefully loosening the soil around a rose bush. "I've never had a garden before. It's therapeutic." They worked in comfortable silence for a while, the afternoon sun warm on their backs and the sound of bees humming in the nearby lavender. Finally, James worked up the courage to ask the question that had been on his mind. "Can I ask you something personal?" he said. "You don't have to answer if you don't want to." Natalie looked up at him curiously. "Of course. Do you ever think about him? Your ex-fiancé?" Natalie was quiet for so long that James started to worry he'd overstepped. But then she sat back on her heels and considered the question seriously. "I used to think about him every day," she said finally. "For the first couple of weeks I was so angry and humiliated. I kept replaying the whole relationship in my mind, looking for signs I should have seen, wondering what I could have done differently. And now I realize I was trying to force something that was never really there," Natalie said. "Michael and I, we looked good together on paper. Same age, same education level, same social circle. But we never had what you and Elena had or what I see in happy couples. We never really knew each other, not deeply." James pulled a stubborn dandelion from the soil. "What do you mean?" "He never asked me about my dreams or fears or what I was thinking about when I got quiet. He never noticed when I was sad or stressed. He liked the idea of me, a pretty, accomplished woman who would look good at his business functions, but he never loved the real me." Natalie pulled off her gardening gloves and looked at her hands. "I think I was so afraid of being alone that I convinced myself it was enough." "It wasn't your fault," James said firmly. "What he did was inexcusable." "No, but staying with someone who didn't really love me was my choice," Natalie said. "I think I was scared that if I admitted he wasn't right for me, I might never find anyone who was." James wanted to tell her that any man would be lucky to have her love, that she was remarkable and deserving of someone who would cherish every part of her. But they were still navigating the boundaries of employer and employee, even though it felt like much more than that. "Do you still want to get married someday?" he asked instead. "Have a family?" "I do," Natalie said without hesitation. "But I want it to be real next time. I want someone who knows all my flaws and loves me anyway. Someone who shows up when they say they will and keeps their promises." She glanced at him sideways. "Like you do." The comment hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning. James felt his heart race as he realized they were having a conversation about much more than gardening and past relationships. "Natalie," he said softly. "I know," she said quickly. "I know this is complicated. You're my employer and Sophie's father, and I'm just the nanny who showed up in your life during a crisis." "You're not just anything," James said firmly. "You're the woman who brought laughter back into our house. You're the person my daughter trusts completely and asks for when she has a nightmare. You're someone I look forward to seeing every morning and talking to every evening." Natalie felt her breath catch. "James? I know it's complicated," he said, echoing her words. "I know there are a dozen reasons why we should keep this professional. But I can't pretend I don't care about you, and I can't pretend this feels like just a working relationship anymore." Before Natalie could respond, they heard Sophie's voice calling from the back door. "Daddy? Miss Natalie? I'm back." They looked at each other for a long moment, both knowing that something important had just shifted between them, something that would need to be addressed soon. "We should probably talk about this more," James said quietly. "We should," Natalie agreed. "But not right now." Sophie came running across the garden toward them, full of excitement about the party and eager to share every detail. As James listened to his daughter chatter about cake and games and party favors, he watched Natalie give Sophie her complete attention, asking questions and laughing at all the right moments. This was what love looked like, he realized. Not the desperate passion he'd felt for Elena when they were young, but something deeper and more settled. Love that grew from friendship and respect and shared daily life. Love that made everything feel possible. And looking at Natalie's face as she listened to Sophie, James was almost certain she felt it too. The conversation in the garden had changed everything, even though they hadn't said the words out loud. Over the next few days, James and Natalie moved around each other with a new awareness, a careful tenderness that spoke of feelings too big and important to rush. Sophie, with the intuitive wisdom of children, seemed to sense that something significant was happening between the two adults in her life. She started making comments about how happy everyone seemed, and how nice it was that our family was so perfect just the way it was. One evening, after Sophie was asleep, James knocked softly on the door of Natalie's guest house. She opened it wearing pajama pants and one of his old college sweatshirts that she'd borrowed to do laundry in, her hair in a messy bun and no makeup. She looked beautiful and real and exactly like home. "I couldn't sleep," he said simply. "Neither could I," she admitted, stepping aside to let him in. They sat on her small couch, suddenly awkward with each other in a way they hadn't been since those first few days. The weight of their feelings filled the small space between them. "I keep thinking about what you said," James began. "About wanting someone who knows all your flaws and loves you anyway." "James?" Natalie started, but he gently interrupted. "Let me finish, please. I need to tell you something, and I need you to really hear it." He turned to face her fully. "I do know your flaws. I know you're stubborn and refuse help even when you need it. I know you blame yourself for things that aren't your fault. I know you eat ice cream directly from the container when you're stressed, and you cry at commercials about families, and you worry constantly about whether you're doing enough for Sophie." Natalie's eyes filled with tears as she realized he really had been paying attention to all the small details of who she was. "And I love every single one of those things about you," James continued. "I love how fiercely you protect the people you care about. I love how you make Sophie feel like she's the most important person in the world when she's talking to you. I love how you hum while you cook and how you always buy flowers for the kitchen table because you think they make the house feel happier." "You notice all that?" Natalie whispered. "I notice everything about you," James said softly. "I notice that you take your coffee black but add sugar to your tea. I notice that you read the same Jane Austen books over and over because they make you feel safe. I notice that you smile differently when you're truly happy versus when you're just being polite." Natalie felt her heart breaking open with the realization that this man saw her, really saw her, in a way Michael never had. "I love you, Natalie," James said simply. "Not as Sophie's nanny, not as someone who happened to need help when we found you. I love you as the woman who makes our house feel like home, who makes Sophie laugh, who makes me want to be the best version of myself." The tears spilled over then and Natalie didn't try to stop them. "I love you too," she whispered. "I've been trying not to because it seemed impossible and complicated and too good to be true. But I can't help it. I love you and I love Sophie and I love the life we've built together." James reached out to cup her face in his hands, thumbs gently wiping away her tears. "It doesn't have to be complicated. Sophie already thinks of you as family. I think of you as family. The only question is whether you want to make it official." Natalie's breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want to marry you," James said, his voice steady and sure. "Not because it's convenient or because Sophie needs a mother, but because I can't imagine my life without you in it. I'm saying I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to share everything with you, the good days and the hard days and all the ordinary beautiful days in between." "But it's only been 2 months, Natalie protested weakly. "People will think we're crazy." "Let them think what they want," James said. "Sophie fell in love with you in 5 minutes. I fell in love with you in 5 days. Some people know each other for years and never really connect. We've been living as a family for 2 months and it's worked perfectly. Why should we wait longer just because other people might think it's too fast?" Natalie thought about all the reasons she should be cautious, all the ways this could go wrong. But then she thought about waking up every morning excited to see James and Sophie, about feeling safer and more loved than she ever had in her life, about the way Sophie had said they needed each other that first day in the church. What if Sophie doesn't want me to be her stepmother? Natalie asked. What if she likes things the way they are now? James smiled. Why don't we ask her? The next morning, they sat Sophie down at the breakfast table with pancakes shaped like hearts, James's idea, and nervous smiles. Sophie, James began carefully, Miss Natalie and I want to talk to you about something important. Sophie looked between them with interest, syrup dripping from her fork. Okay. How would you feel if Miss Natalie wasn't just your nanny anymore? James asked. What if she became part of our family in a different way? Sophie tilted her head, considering. You mean like if you married her and she became my mommy for real? Both adults stared at her in shock. How did you? Natalie started. I'm not a baby, Sophie said matter-of-factly. I can see that you love each other. You look at each other the same way Daddy looks at pictures of my first mommy, but happy instead of sad. And how do you feel about that? James asked gently. Sophie put down her fork and looked at them seriously. I think my first mommy sent Miss Natalie to us because she knew we needed her. I think she would be happy that we found each other and that I get to have a mommy who's here with me. Natalie felt tears streaming down her face as Sophie climbed into her lap and hugged her tightly. I love you, Miss Natalie, Sophie said fiercely. I want you to be my mommy forever and ever. I love you too, sweetheart, Natalie managed through her tears. So much. James watched his daughter and the woman he loved embrace, and felt a peace settle over him that he hadn't experienced since Elena died. This was right. This was meant to be. This was the family they were always supposed to become. So, he said, clearing his throat to get their attention. Should we start planning a wedding? Sophie pulled back from Natalie with excitement. Can I be the flower girl? Can I pick out my dress? Can we have chocolate cake? You can have anything you want, Natalie said, laughing through her tears. It's going to be the most beautiful wedding ever. But even as they began to plan and dream together, Natalie felt a small shadow of worry. She'd thought her last wedding would be beautiful too, and look how that had ended. What if she was making the same mistake again? What if she was rushing into something that would fall apart? James seemed to sense her doubts. That night, after Sophie was asleep, he took Natalie's hands in his and looked directly into her eyes. I know you're scared, he said softly. I know your trust was broken and you're afraid it could happen again. But I want you to know something: I will never leave you. Not at the altar, not ever. I will show up every day for the rest of our lives and choose you over and over again. Promise? Natalie whispered. I promise, James said solemnly. You and Sophie are my whole world now. Nothing could make me walk away from that. And looking into his eyes, Natalie believed him completely. 2 weeks later, James was pacing nervously in his bedroom, checking his watch every few minutes and running his hands through his hair. Today was the day he was going to propose to Natalie officially, with a ring and everything, and he wanted it to be perfect. Sophie was downstairs keeping Natalie busy with a complicated art project that required lots of concentration and no interruptions, giving James time to finalize his preparations. He'd spent days planning this moment, wanting it to be meaningful and personal rather than grand or showy. The ring was hidden in his sock drawer, a simple but elegant solitaire that he'd chosen because it reminded him of Natalie herself. Classic, beautiful, and timeless. He'd considered asking Sophie to help pick it out, but had decided this was something he wanted to choose himself, based on what he'd learned about Natalie's preferences over the past 2 months. She didn't like flashy jewelry or anything too ornate. She preferred simple, elegant pieces that could be worn every day. And she'd mentioned once, while looking at photos in a magazine, that she thought solitaire engagement rings were the most romantic because they focused attention on the diamond itself rather than elaborate settings. The location for the proposal had been easier to decide. He was going to take her back to St. Mary's Cathedral where they'd first met. Not to the sanctuary where she'd been abandoned, but to the small garden behind the church where couples often took wedding photos. He wanted to replace her painful memories of that place with something beautiful. Daddy? Sophie's voice called from downstairs. Are you ready? Miss Natalie is getting suspicious. James took a deep breath, slipped the ring box into his jacket pocket and headed downstairs. He found Natalie at the kitchen table, covered in glitter and construction paper, helping Sophie create what appeared to be a very elaborate greeting card. What are you two working on? He asked, trying to sound casual. It's a surprise, Sophie said importantly. I can't tell you until later. Natalie looked up at him with a smile, and James felt his heart skip the way it did every time she looked at him like that, with warmth and affection and a happiness that seemed to start from deep inside her. "I was thinking we could go for a drive this afternoon," James said. "Maybe visit some of the places that are special to us." "That sounds lovely," Natalie said. "Sophie, would you like to come with us?" "Actually," Sophie said, grinning widely, "I'm going to stay here with Mrs. Henderson from next door. Daddy already asked her to come over." Natalie looked between father and daughter suspiciously. "You two are definitely up to something." "Maybe," James said with a smile. "You'll just have to trust us." An hour later, James and Natalie were driving through the city on a beautiful autumn afternoon. The leaves were changing colors, painting the landscape in shades of gold and crimson, and the air had that crisp quality that made everything feel fresh and full of possibility. "Where are we going?" Natalie asked as James took a familiar route toward downtown. "You'll see," he said mysteriously. When they pulled into the parking lot of St. Mary's Cathedral, Natalie's face went through several emotions at once: surprise, concern, and then understanding as she realized what James was doing. "James," she said softly, "I know this place has painful memories for you," he said, taking her hand. "But I wanted to come back here because this is where our story really began. This is where Sophie found you, where we found each other. I thought maybe we could create some new memories here." They walked around to the small garden behind the church, where late-blooming roses climbed a white trellis and a small fountain bubbled peacefully in the center. It was quiet and private, bathed in golden afternoon sunlight. "It's beautiful back here," Natalie said, looking around. "I never knew this garden existed." "Sophie discovered it the day we met you," James said. "While I was frantically searching for her in the church, she was back here picking flowers for you. She said she wanted to find something pretty to make you smile." As if on cue, they heard the sound of small footsteps, and Sophie appeared from behind the trellis, beaming and carrying a bouquet of roses from the garden. "Sophie!" Natalie exclaimed. "What are you doing here? I thought you were staying with Mrs. Henderson." "I had to come," Sophie said importantly. "This is the most important part." James knelt down to Sophie's level and whispered something in her ear. She nodded seriously, then walked over to Natalie with the bouquet. "Miss Natalie," Sophie said solemnly, "these flowers are from me and Daddy and my first mommy, who I think is watching from heaven and is very happy about what's happening." Natalie accepted the bouquet with trembling hands, already sensing what was coming next. James stood up and moved to stand in front of her, his hands shaking slightly as he reached into his jacket pocket. "Natalie Thompson," he said, his voice steady despite his nerves, 2 months ago you came into our lives when you needed us most. But what I've realized is that we needed you just as much." He dropped to one knee, pulling out the ring box and opening it to reveal the sparkling diamond inside. Natalie gasped, her free hand flying to cover her mouth. "You've brought light and love and laughter back into our home," James continued. "You've given Sophie the mother she's always dreamed of, and you've given me a love I thought I might never find again. You've shown us both what it means to be a family." Tears were streaming down Natalie's face as she looked between James and Sophie, both of them watching her with such love and hope that it took her breath away. "Will you marry me?" James asked simply. "Will you be my wife and Sophie's mother and our partner in all the adventures still to come?" Before Natalie could answer, Sophie stepped forward with her own small contribution to the proposal. From her pocket, she pulled out a ring pop with a bright red candy diamond. "And will you be my mommy forever and ever?" Sophie asked seriously, holding out the candy ring. "Because I love you so much and I want us to be a real family." Natalie looked down at this precious little girl who had been the first to see what she needed, the first to offer love without conditions, the first to call her family. Then she looked at James, who was still kneeling patiently, waiting for her answer with such tenderness in his eyes that she wondered how she'd ever thought she knew what love was before this moment. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "yes. Yes to both of you, yes to everything, yes forever." James slipped the ring onto her finger with shaking hands while Sophie cheered and danced around them. Then he stood up and kissed Natalie softly, tasting the salt of happy tears on her lips. "I love you," he murmured against her mouth. "I love you too," she replied. "Both of you so much." Sophie insisted on putting the ring pop on Natalie's other hand, declaring that she needed 2 engagement rings because she's getting 2 new family members, me and Daddy. As they stood together in the garden where their love story had really begun, surrounded by roses and golden sunlight, Natalie felt a peace settle over her that she'd never experienced before. This wasn't the desperate, anxious love she'd felt with Michael, built on fear of being alone and trying to force something that wasn't meant to be. This was deep, settled love built on friendship and daily kindness and shared dreams for the future. When should we have the wedding? Sophie asked practically, still admiring both of Natalie's rings. James and Natalie looked at each other and laughed. What do you think? James asked Natalie. How long do you need to plan the wedding of your dreams? I don't need long, Natalie said without hesitation. I've learned that the most important part of a wedding isn't the decorations or the dress or the perfect venue. It's marrying the right person, surrounded by people who love you. 2 months. James suggested. That would make it just before Christmas. Sophie loves Christmas weddings. Perfect, Natalie agreed. That gives us time to plan something beautiful but not so long that we have to wait forever to officially be a family. Sophie clapped her hands together. Can we go tell Mrs. Henderson? She's been waiting in the car and she's probably wondering what's taking so long. They walked back to the parking lot hand in hand, Natalie in the middle with James on one side and Sophie on the other. Mrs. Henderson, James's elderly neighbor who had become like a grandmother to Sophie, was indeed waiting in her car with a knowing smile on her face. I take it everything went according to plan? She asked when they approached her window. Better than planned, James said, his arm around Natalie's waist. We're getting married. And I'm going to be the flower girl and the maid of honor, Sophie announced importantly. Because Miss Natalie said I can be both if I want to. Mrs. Henderson beamed at them. Congratulations, dear ones. I've been watching this romance bloom for weeks now, and I couldn't be happier for all of you. That evening, after Sophie was finally asleep despite being too excited about the engagement to settle down easily, James and Natalie sat on the porch swing in his backyard, planning their future and marveling at how quickly their lives had changed. Are you sure about the timeline? James asked, playing with the engagement ring on her finger. We can take longer if you want a big wedding with all the traditional elements. I'm sure, Natalie said firmly. I've had the big traditional wedding. It was beautiful and expensive and meant nothing because it wasn't built on real love. This time, I want something smaller and more meaningful. What do you want? James asked. Tell me about your dream wedding. Natalie leaned back against his chest and thought about it. I want it to be in a place that matters to us. I want Sophie to be involved in every part of it. I want our friends and family there, but I don't need hundreds of people. I want flowers and music and dancing, but most of all I want to marry you. That sounds perfect, James said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Simple and elegant and focused on what really matters. What about you? Natalie asked. What do you want for our wedding? I want to see you walking down the aisle toward me, knowing that this time the groom is going to be there waiting, James said seriously. I want to promise you forever in front of everyone we love. And I want Sophie to feel like she's gaining a mother, not losing any of her special relationship with me. She's not losing anything, Natalie assured him. If anything, she's gaining more love and security. Children can never have too many people who love them unconditionally. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky and listening to the peaceful sounds of their neighborhood settling in for the night. Can I ask you something? Natalie said eventually. Anything. Do you think Elena would approve? Of us, I mean. Of me becoming Sophie's mother. James was quiet for a long moment, considering the question seriously. I think Elena would love you, he said finally. Not because you're replacing her, no one could do that, but because you love Sophie the way she would have wanted her to be loved. You see all the wonderful things about her and encourage her to be her best self. You make her feel safe and valued and cherished. I hope so, Natalie said softly. I never want Sophie to feel like I'm trying to erase her mother's memory. You couldn't if you tried, James assured her. Elena will always be Sophie's first mother, the one who gave her life. But you're going to be her everyday mother, the one who helps her grow up and navigate the world. Both roles are important and beautiful. I love her so much already, Natalie confessed. Sometimes it scares me how fierce my love for her is. I would do anything to protect her happiness. That's how you know you're meant to be her mother, James said. That protective instinct, that willingness to put her needs first, that's real maternal love. As they finally headed inside for the night, Natalie caught sight of her reflection in the hallway mirror and was startled by what she saw. The woman looking back at her was glowing with happiness, her eyes bright with hope and love. She looked like someone who had found exactly where she belonged in the world. I can't wait to marry you, she whispered to James as they reached the top of the stairs. 2 months, he whispered back, kissing her softly. And then we'll be a family in every way that matters. We already are, Natalie said with a smile. The wedding is just going to make it official. 8 weeks later, on a crisp December morning with fresh snow covering the ground like a blessing, Natalie stood in the bridal suite at St. Mary's Cathedral, looking at herself in the mirror and marveling at how different this moment felt from the last time she'd prepared for a wedding. Her dress was simpler this time, an elegant ivory gown with delicate lace sleeves and a flowing skirt that moved like water when she walked. Instead of an elaborate updo, her hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, with tiny white flowers tucked behind one ear. She looked like herself, only more so, radiant with genuine happiness instead of nervous anxiety. Sophie sat nearby in her flower girl dress, a miniature version of Natalie's gown in pale pink, carefully arranging the petals in her basket. She'd been awake since dawn, too excited to sleep, and had been Natalie's constant companion all morning, offering helpful advice and endless commentary. "Miss Natalie, I mean Mommy," Sophie said, still getting used to the new title they'd been practicing. "You look like a princess from one of my books. The kind who's brave and smart, not just pretty." "Thank you, sweetheart," Natalie said, kneeling down to Sophie's level to adjust a curl that had escaped from her flower crown. "You look absolutely beautiful too. Daddy's going to cry when he sees you." "Happy crying or sad crying?" Sophie asked with concern. "The happiest crying ever," Natalie assured her. "Because today we officially become a family." There was a soft knock at the door, and James's mother-in-law, Grandma Elena, entered carrying a small wrapped box. She'd flown in from Arizona for the wedding and had immediately embraced Natalie as another daughter, making it clear that she understood the difference between replacing her daughter and loving her granddaughter. "I have something for you," Grandma Elena said with a warm smile. "Something borrowed and something blue." She opened the box to reveal a delicate pearl bracelet with small blue sapphires between each pearl. This was Elena's. She wore it on her wedding day and I wore it on mine. I thought, if you'd like to carry on the tradition. Natalie felt tears well up in her eyes as she realized the significance of the gesture. "Are you sure? I don't want to presume." "My dear," Grandma Elena said gently, "Elena would have wanted Sophie's new mother to have something beautiful to mark this special day. And I can't think of anyone she would have approved of more than you." With trembling hands, Natalie allowed Grandma Elena to fasten the bracelet around her wrist. It felt like a blessing, a passing of love from one generation to the next. "Now," Grandma Elena said, stepping back to admire her, "you're ready to marry my son-in-law and give my granddaughter the complete family she deserves." Downstairs in the church, James was pacing nervously in the small room where grooms traditionally waited. His best man, his business partner Tom, watched with amusement as James checked his watch for the 10th time in 5 minutes. "She's going to show up," Tom said reassuringly. "This isn't like last time. Natalie loves you." "I know she does," James said, adjusting his tie again. "I'm not worried about her changing her mind. I want everything to be perfect for her. She deserves a perfect wedding day." "It will be perfect because it's real," Tom said. "Because you're marrying the right person for the right reasons and everyone here loves you both." The church was decorated simply but beautifully, with white roses and evergreen garlands that filled the air with the scent of winter and new beginnings. Instead of hundreds of guests, there were 50 people who truly mattered to them: close friends, family members, Sophie's grandparents, some of James's colleagues, and several of the mothers from Sophie's school who had become Natalie's dear friends. When the music began, James took his place at the altar and felt his breath catch as the processional started. First came Sophie, walking down the aisle with careful, measured steps, scattering rose petals with the serious concentration of someone who understood the importance of her job. She beamed when she spotted her father and gave him a little wave before taking her place at the front. Then the music swelled, and Natalie appeared at the back of the church. But this time she wasn't walking alone. James had asked if there was anyone she wanted to escort her down the aisle, and Natalie had surprised him by asking if Sophie could walk with her. "She's the one who brought us together," Natalie had explained. "It seems fitting that she should be the one to give me away." So now, Natalie walked slowly down the aisle with Sophie beside her, the little girl's hand tucked into hers, both of them glowing with happiness. When they reached the altar, Sophie very solemnly placed Natalie's hand in her father's before taking her place as maid of honor. "Dearly beloved," Pastor Williams began, but James barely heard the opening words. He was lost in Natalie's eyes, amazed by the love and trust he saw there, overwhelmed by the knowledge that this woman had chosen him and Sophie as her family. When it came time for vows, they decided to write their own. James went first, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "Natalie," he began, "when I found you in this church 8 months ago, I thought I was just helping a stranger in distress. I had no idea I was meeting the woman who would change everything about my life for the better. You've brought joy and warmth and laughter back into our home. You've loved my daughter as if she were your own from the very first day. And you've shown me that it's possible to love again, even when you thought your heart was too broken to take that risk." He paused, looking down at Sophie, who was watching with rapt attention. "You've made us a complete family, and I promise to spend every day for the rest of my life showing you how grateful I am that you chose us. I promise to love you, to support your dreams, to be your partner in all of life's adventures. I promise to show up for you always, to keep my word, and to love you more each day than I did the day before." Natalie was crying now, but they were tears of pure joy. When it was her turn, she took a steadying breath and spoke from her heart. "James, 8 months ago I thought my life was ending. I felt like a failure, like someone who would never be worthy of real love. But you and Sophie showed me that love isn't about being perfect or having all the answers. Love is about showing up for each other, about choosing each other every day, about building something beautiful together." She looked down at Sophie, including her in the vows. "Sophie, you were the first person to see that I needed a family as much as you needed a mother. Your wisdom and love and open heart saved me in ways you might not understand yet, but someday I'll tell you all about it. I promise to love you and protect you and support you as you grow into the amazing woman I know you'll become." Turning back to James, she continued, "And James, I promise to be your partner and your best friend. I promise to love you in the good times and the challenging times. I promise to build a home with you where Sophie can grow up feeling safe and loved and confident. And I promise that no matter what comes our way, I will never run away from this love we've built together." When Pastor Williams pronounced them husband and wife, James kissed Natalie with 8 months of pent-up love and commitment. Sophie cheered and threw the remaining flower petals in the air like confetti, and the small congregation erupted in applause and joyful tears. At the reception held in the church's fellowship hall decorated with twinkling lights and winter flowers, the new family shared their first dance to "At Last" by Etta James. Halfway through the song, Sophie tapped on James's leg and asked if she could dance too, so they made room for her between them, the three of them swaying together as a family for the first time as husband, wife, and daughter. Later, as they cut the cake chocolate, as Sophie had requested, Natalie looked around at the faces of everyone who had come to celebrate with them. Mrs. Henderson was dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Grandma Elena was taking approximately 1,000 photos. James's colleagues were raising toasts to the happy couple. Sophie's teacher had brought her a special wedding gift, a book about blended families that she'd inscribed for Sophie, who knew what her family needed before anyone else did. "Are you happy?" James whispered in Natalie's ear as they watched Sophie teaching some of the other children how to properly throw flower petals. "I didn't know it was possible to be this happy," Natalie replied honestly. "I feel like I'm living in a dream." "Not a dream," James corrected, spinning her around the dance floor. "This is real life. This is our real life, and it's just beginning." As the evening wound down and they prepared to leave for their honeymoon, a week in a cozy cabin in the mountains while Sophie stayed with Grandma Elena, Natalie caught Sophie's bouquet when the little girl threw it directly at her new stepmother. "You have to catch it," Sophie had insisted. "It's good luck for our family." Standing in the church parking lot, still in her wedding dress, surrounded by rice and well wishes and the love of people who truly cared about them, Natalie thought about how far she'd come from that devastating day 8 months ago. She'd thought her life was ending when Michael ran away. Instead, it had been the beginning of everything she'd never dared to dream she could have. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Mitchell?" James asked, opening the car door for her. "I've been ready my whole life," Natalie replied, kissing him softly. "I just didn't know I was waiting for you." As they drove away from the church, with Sophie waving enthusiastically from Grandma Elena's arms, Natalie felt the last of her old fears and doubts fall away. She was exactly where she belonged, with exactly the people she was meant to love, living exactly the life she was meant to live. Sometimes the worst day of your life turns out to be the first day of your real life beginning. Sometimes losing everything you thought you wanted leads you to everything you actually needed. And sometimes a little girl's simple wisdom, "You need a home, and I need a mommy," turns out to be the answer to prayers you didn't even know you were praying. Natalie Thompson Mitchell had finally found her happily ever after, and it was more beautiful than any fairy tale she'd ever read. The end. Thank you so much for joining Natalie, James, and Sophie on their journey to becoming a family. Their story reminds us that sometimes our greatest blessings come disguised as our worst disappointments, and that love often finds us when we least expect it but need it most. I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever experienced a moment where a child's innocent words changed your entire perspective? What do you think it takes to build a blended family successfully? Do you believe in second chances at love? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories might inspire the next heartwarming tale.